Thank you very much for being here. I do keep remembering that this is called the year ahead. At Davos, the tendency is to have a much longer time frame because it's sort of easier to predict 10 years ahead than 10 minutes ahead sometimes. But it did strike me coming over here that we spend all of these sessions often talking about disruption, business models being turned on their head, even the whole conception of what a company can be and also what its responsibilities might be nationally and globally changes. But if you kind of put your head up from that, the immediate environment looks a bit calmer, and as an economist, looks a little bit calmer than it did a few months ago. So I guess I should ask you, I mean, what's the year ahead look like for you?
Well, I can tell you what I'm hearing. And, meeting with business leaders today, all of them are focused on growth in this global world. And I think whereas in the past people tended to talk about either growth or managing for risk and uncertainty, that's just the new normal, and people talk more about resiliency. So I find a very optimistic tone on growth and investment with the customers that I'm able to talk to. I also see going forward, I think we'll continue to see a lot of activism, employee activism, shareholder activism, consumer activism. I think that will continue to be something that CEOs have to understand and balance across the different stakeholders. And as Mark said, to pick up where he left off, we do believe experience is the new battleground. If a company's not competing on experience, it is a race to the bottom. Whether you're in a consumer-led economy, like the United States as an example, the disruption that we see happening for a lot of traditional companies out there, traditional industries, is happening in the experience gap, meaning what businesses might think that they're providing is very different than what consumers want or are experiencing. So you look at a lot of the companies that went public in this past year, take Peloton as a great example. I mean, they're stepping into somebody else's experience gap, and they're providing a better, not just a service, but truly an experience that people will pay more for. When you look at manufacturing-led economies, in Germany as an example, and you think of, whether it's a car manufacturer, you think about wholesale distribution, those companies that maybe have been one step removed from the end consumer have to understand exactly what that end consumer is thinking. And for us, what we got excited about, we made our largest acquisition, a company called Qualtrics in 2019, for exactly that reason, because the ability to be able to understand what your stakeholder wants when it's happening, understand not just what's happening, but why is it happening, in order to not just measure, everybody's measuring, but to be able to actually act. So we see experience as really being the battleground.
And do you agree with Mark Foster that every company could become a platform company in the next 12 months?
Absolutely. I think that there's something to that. I mean, it used to be, when we would be out talking to our customers, you tended to have conversations with, in our business, whether it was the CIO or the CFO. But you're seeing, the CEO and the board engage at a much deeper level because they're becoming technology companies themselves. Technology used to follow the strategy. Technology now is creating the opportunities for doing things completely differently, new business models, et cetera. So it's interesting to see the kinds of conversations that are evolving and the different people who are now involved in those conversations that were very different in the last few years.
I'm interested in trying to make this a bit more practical to people. I mean, ERP is what the company was built on.
Yes.
And it's obviously been through various, the concept has been through various iterations over the years. If it is now about experience and about helping companies unleash that information that's outside of is held kind of by consumers outside of the walls of the company, what does that mean for you going into a company? How does that change the way you're dealing with them?
Well, if you think about ERP and when it was formed, that was back at a time when all the data of a company was within the four walls of a company. And it was an opportunity to look at different functions within a company that were interdependent, so financials, supply chain, manufacturing. And the ability to actually connect those functions, integrate those functions, led to more efficiencies, more effectiveness, more profitability, a better way to run the business. Well, today, you probably have more data outside the four walls of your company around your consumers, your products, your services, et cetera. And so the trick is to be able to understand not just what's happening, right? Not just understanding your revenue or your sales or your churn or whatever it might be, but understand why it's happening and be able to combine not just the operational data that every company has today and is trying to figure out how do I use that to predict what might happen, but how do I use that to understand which customers are going to churn, right? So combining the operational data with the experience data allows you to look at problems very differently and take action. Again, everybody's measuring, but it's very much an after the fact, something's already happened versus within the process, understanding what's going wrong and why, and how you can go further upstream and make a change. You can do that not just with your consumers, but with your employees as an example, right? To be able to understand we have so much data about our employees. HR was traditionally a function that was about tracking and measuring certain processes or points of an employee's life cycle. We have a lot of data about that. But how do we actually use that data and what our employees are telling us to go upstream and create a better experience? We know what happens when somebody's promoted. We know that they're going to be burnt out. They're probably going to be traveling a lot more. There's probably a lot of learning that's happening. We know what they're going to go through, but we typically don't engage with them to get ready for that and create a better experience and a more effective experience. We just know what happens afterward.
I mean, it's interesting because I think you're on the sort of one side of, or one part of the great debate we have about what the impact of technological disruption is going to be on jobs, because it comes down to individuals, it's not just numbers and jobs. So when you're going into, when a company's going through a major transition, becoming a different kind of company,
yes.
Using technology in a new way, thanks to new technologies, new ways of doing things, whose responsibility is it to help the employees through that? And how much is it going to be the case that, you have to accept that there's just going to be a big turnover and that it's going to be the individual's responsibility to find themselves a new job?
Yeah, it's a great question because when the conversations were starting a few years ago around digital disruption, they were very much technology focused and what the company was trying to do. Now what we see happening is at the boardroom table, the head of the chief people officer. Again, you don't hear people referred to necessarily as just the head of HR, the chief people officer, the chief culture officer. They're alongside of all this transformation for exactly the reason you just said, right? Because that's just as big of a part of the transformation in terms of how the companies. There's a difference between modernization and transformation. Modernization is essentially just taking processes in the same way you do things and maybe making them a little bit more efficient with technology. And that tends to be when people think about technology, it's hard to change. Transformation happens when you really reimagine how you're going to do something. And that does require not just the people at the top envisioning and putting that transformation in place. The business has to drive that, but they have to engage the people because they have to own it. And so any kind of successful transformation absolutely starts with the business leader, with the why. A lot of times we don't start with why. That's very important. And then engaging people within the company to help, number one, bring people along, but also for the ideas that they have. I mean, I found some of the best ideas that we've gotten in terms of our own company and what we needed to do better on came from probably the people you wouldn't traditionally expect. And I've learned a lot from that.
I mean, it's interesting you mentioned, it'd be nice to talk a little bit about SAP because, last year you had a pretty tumultuous year and lost 4,500 employees. There was a lot of debate around that because you maybe you continue to have a reputation as a great employer. Mm-hmm. You come top of a lot of those tables, and I'm even told that the free food is better than the free food at Bloomberg, which I find hard to believe.
But pretzels are great.
Stories of people with their Tupperware taking them home for dinner, which I don't think they do at Bloomberg. But if you're looking back, I mean, you were not co-CEO at that time, but what was the motivation for losing those people? Do you think it could have been handled differently? Do you think it's damaged your reputation as a great employer who holds on to people?
Yeah, for us, for any we just passed 100,000 employees, and for any company of this size and scale, you have to constantly be evolving and changing. And so for us, these are not easy decisions, and this is something that that's never taken lightly. But what we found is that in going through this process, we're able to actually allow a lot of our employees to move to different areas of the company. So it's not just about the people themselves, but making sure that those those people don't have jobs, but maybe they have different jobs. And so when you look at a lot of those employees, many of them moved into new positions, but it's never, it's never easy, and it's tough. And large companies have to face a lot of these tough decisions.
Do you think we were talking about? Mark was talking about how this was the year of experience, which made me feel a bit like all these old timers at Davos, making sure that they remain very important. But is a technology company? I wouldn't refer. I mean, of course, no one in this room would fall under that category, but. Is technology the technology firms, the technology world, just inherently ageist? I mean, are you always going to fight this challenge of how do you make sure that you're staying fresh, bringing in new blood, while also respecting and gaining the experience of more long-standing employees?
Yeah, we have 5 generations of employees in our workforce, and I think a company does have to stay forever young. But being forever young doesn't necessarily take a literal sense, And I think this is when the power of bringing different people together to bring wisdom and experience together, and maybe experience in a different sense, experience in terms of, having gone through different types of experiences that guide your thinking for how to do things going forward, and bringing people in who may be earlier in their career and really have more of that beginner's mindset. So I don't think it's about age. I've seen, we see leaders now who aren't, who don't fit the traditional model of, what a CEO looks like in terms of their education or their age or their experience. And on the flip side, you see people who are, reinventing themselves well into their career. So I think that we have to, you have to kind of let go of those, biases when you think about how you keep a company forever young.
There was one more question I wanted to ask about the company, and then I'm really interested to hear what you say in response to some of the things that Satya Nadella was saying. SAP as a European tech company, as a global company, has been fantastically successful. Was grown enormously in terms of its market cap under your predecessor, Bill McDermott. And if you look now at the sort of the valuation in the market, the price-earnings ratio, it is compared to others in the same space, who maybe the market thinks is a bit more exciting. Feels like it's trading at a discount. It's sort of 22 versus, in many cases, many times that or several times that. So do you yourself see that as a problem, or is that not the yardstick that you measure yourself by?
We see ourselves as a growth company, right? And I think that for me, one of the biggest opportunities we have is, our core business, the digital core business, which we, ERP, S4, is still very much, a strong business for us. Companies today who are looking at growth, who are looking at M&A, who are looking at moving into other parts of the world to do business, all of the regulatory changes, the supply chain uncertainty and the flexibility that's necessary. All of those very relevant topics are very, very much front and center to the decisions that our customers are making around continued investments in our core, in our heritage, which is ERP. At the same time, over the last several years, we've invested in a lot of different areas of our portfolio. And when you look at the growth that we're seeing in the cloud, it's in strong double digits. So we feel that we've been able to offer, the best of many worlds to our customers rather. We have a really big ecosystem, which has always served us well. And I think that that's one of the things that I think has very much differentiated our company, because businesses today are working with a lot of different partners, and they have a lot of people around their table giving them advice around digital and technology. And many times they're left to their own devices as to how do I put all this together and kind of create my own journey. We've always, been very open and making sure that everything that we're developing is in the context of a lot of the other trends that are out there. Satya talked about many of them earlier before. Microsoft is a great partner of ours as well. And I think that will continue to serve us very well. So we believe that our best days are absolutely ahead.
So you are undervalued.
You said it.
I'm fascinated, the group that I manage has got fantastic, it's got sort of 100 economic reporters around the world who've been very focused, many of them on the trade wars, and then economists are doing, sort of cranking the numbers on what the impact might be on the economy. From your vantage point, when you're talking to all these clients all over the world, how much has the US-China not just the trade war, but the fundamental change in the attitude of the US towards China, whether it's for technology, on trade. How is that affecting the way they think about their long-term plans for their supply chain, for their technology partners?
I mean, supply chain is definitely a front and center topic, and it's something that we have a lot of experience in, and a lot of customers rely on us on. You know, I think that there was a time where when there was a focus on those types of things and what was happening, but it's just become what they have to prepare for. And so I like this word resiliency, because I think it's part of business now. So, you know, all of these companies have to do business in a lot of different parts of the world and are trying to balance that and trying to, you can't overthink something because you never know what's going to happen, but you can think about what's critical in terms of a technology platform that can be future-proof and that can be flexible in terms of guiding through new regulation, because that's going to continue to come, global expansion, supply chain flexibility.
But does future-proofing, does the flexibility actually mean, in some cases, offering people parallel paths that they might be able to take, using, you know, Huawei or not using Huawei? I mean, is that part of the conversation?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that that's dominating the conversation right now. I mean, I think a lot of companies, we're one of them. We've done business in China for 25 years. You know, the majority of the Fortune 2000 companies in China are SAP customers. And so, you know, we're navigating our way through that as well, much like American companies have to also, because we have a very large business here in the United States that we're very proud of.
And you do always emphasize that it's a global company and you're based in the US. But from a European standpoint, I mean, I would say, you know, the US, rightly or wrongly, now has this rather different, quite clear-eyed assessment of China when it comes to technology transfer. The Europeans have, the Chinese have been quite good at sort of dividing and conquering, at having certain countries work with them, whereas the Germans have actually tried to take a different path. Do you think there should be a united European approach to China as a technology partner? Is there any chance of it happening?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. You know, I know that, you know, I met with Chancellor Merkel in December, and, you know, she's very, I mean, just, it was an incredible meeting because she's very interested in what we're seeing. You know, like, what is SAP seeing around the world? How is SAP as a, you know, a European technology company? You know, what are the conversations that are out there? And clearly this is a topic that's out there, but I think it has yet to play out.
But you don't find in your day-to-day that that it's a confused...
No.
The German position is kind of confused or confusing?
No.
I want to say a bit, and Peter Grauer talked about our diversity index, and I wanted to ask you, because SAP is, well, you're the first female chief executive in the DAX, but more importantly, you've been part of the efforts that have allowed SAP to be recognized by the WEF and by others as a great force for diversity and inclusion. You know, what has it taken in SAP to really sort of talk the talk, walk the walk, as well as talking the talk on diversity and inclusion?
Look, I think you have to lead by example. And I think we have to disrupt the traditional definition of ready. You know, I'll tell you a story. For me, when I was appointed to run our North American business, at the time, I was promoted 2 levels above. And that, in traditional terms, meant, oh, I wasn't ready. And it was a good example, because at the time, you know, a lot of people thought, oh my gosh, you know, the business is in turmoil, is this the right decision? It worked out okay. And I just think that as leaders, we have to think differently about that definition. And it requires not just women to lead the charge, but it requires men. You know, I had great male sponsors, you know, not just mentors, sponsors who dragged me along, you know, who gave me the opportunity, who gave me the opportunity to learn, to shine, to make mistakes. And so I'm very, very passionate about being a role model, and especially in Europe. When I go to Europe, I notice a stark difference than when I'm in the United States. I actually didn't know I was the first woman CEO of a DAX company. And I give credit to, you know, Hasso Plattner, our chairman, because when he appointed me, he didn't mention anything about that. In fact, I didn't realize that until I was being interviewed that night for the first time. And I remember that. That spoke volumes to me. So, you know, I think leaders have the ability to disrupt the norm, to put people in these positions, to champion women and underrepresented minorities. Because if you think about who your consumers are, I mean, it's a diverse world we live in. You have to have diverse people building great software and supporting your customers in different ways.
And actually the flexibility point, I mean, I was always struck, my mother was very involved in sort of campaigning for accessibility for disabled people, and we've come so far on that, but actually I think the big change that happened was when people recognized that actually having a ramp or, you know, bringing the pavement down somewhere didn't just help people in wheelchairs, it helped people with pushchairs and older people who had trouble moving around. Have we cracked that when it comes to flexible working? Because we still always talk about women in the context of flexible working, and really it works for everybody.
That's right. I'll give you one other example of, you know, kind of a non-traditional way to think about talent. So for us, we have a program at SAP called Autism at Work. And, you know, I'm sure everybody in this room knows somebody who is on the spectrum. And when you think about how you enter a company, you know, you go in for an interview. And you know, people judge you based on that interview, how you carry yourself. And folks who are on the spectrum, there we go. Folks who are on the spectrum traditionally haven't interviewed well. And so what's happened is a lot of these people who have incredible educations, incredible skill sets, find themselves, you know, having a hard time finding employment. And so what we did is we changed the way that we thought about, you know, the traditional way of interviewing and assessing candidates, and have created this amazing program that has brought this talent on. And I personally had the opportunity to engage with the talent on this team, because what we found is, especially in the technology world, the skill.
Oh. Do we need to get a hand mic just quickly for the last minute? Just a hand mic, I think. We had literally, this was with 1 minute to go. It's just...
I'll be quick.
Yeah.
So, but it was fascinating because, you know, when you look at their skill sets, and they align very, very well to a lot of the analysis, the support around our customer base, and a lot of the insights and analysis that I was getting in terms of the conversations I was having with the street, with investors, I realized that much of the work product that I had been receiving was from a gentleman named Mike Giango, who worked in the program. And when I met him, it was just a fascinating experience, because having seen the work product that was one of the most stellar that I had ever seen, and seeing Mike, I was able to judge his abilities through his intellect and his work product.
And the funny thing about that is, you know, from experience, one knows from looking at the data that if you sort of reduce the importance of, say, the interview, you're also making things easier for people who didn't go to the great schools that taught them to interview well and everything.
That's
so
exactly
it has that benefit for everybody else.
Exactly.
I have to ask, we've run out of time, but I have really enjoyed your podcast, and I have to ask you, is it a call to lead?
Yes.
With fantastic speakers. You've had Malcolm Gladwell, Laura Dern,
Simon Sinek,
Tony
Blair.
Ariana, so are you going to do it again? I mean, I think you became CEO, co-CEO after the first series had come out.
I don't know. You know, I really loved it, and I created it because I wanted to bring, you know, with leaders today who don't fit the traditional profile. Many of them don't have the years of experience, et cetera. And so I love this idea of bringing wisdom through time and experience of these different leaders, because I think you can learn so much from different people. And I learned a lot. So I want to continue doing it, but the reality is I don't know that I can commit to once a week. And I want to, you know, but I want to continue the learning journey. I think you have to continue to learn as you lead.
It is interesting to have a senior executive doing a weekly or even a monthly podcast.
You got to disrupt the traditional
these guys,
norm.
what would you say for people in this room, whether if they were considering having a podcast, that is it good for a CEO to be sitting in front of a microphone?
You have different perspectives on that. You know, the emails I get from employees and people out in the workforce love it because they're very authentic conversations, and they can learn and hear stories very authentically about mistakes people have made, you know, the experiences that they had that molded them. And so I'm not maybe the traditional leader, and I'm okay with that. So we'll see.
Well, while you're not broadcasting, I guess I should say if you're looking for a great podcast, Stephanomics is available.
It is a great podcast.
Jennifer Morgan, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you.